taking a beginning look, getting ready to start the process of switching over to the Precision NX2 turbo from the OEM turbo in my 2020 Mustang Ecoboost. We've got to remove the intake pipe over here, taking the clamps off. Of course, you're going to have to remove the blow-off valve bypass tube and remove the hot side intake tube. What I'll do is I'll take this clamp and this clamp loose, and then can't really see it, but down here at the intercooler I'll take the clamps loose and pull that whole tube out of there. And I'll take these clamps off down here. I don't know if you can see that there. Those clamps off to remove this tubing, which is the intake tube. And that'll give us some access. And then I'll have to take off the heat shield by taking off those top two nuts. And then there's a nut down up on the underside. It's an 8mm. I'll remove it and pull the heat shield out. And the downpipe, there's two, I believe they are 9/16 or 15mm nuts that have to be removed. And then there's two 13mm nuts down on a bracket down in there that will have to be removed or loosened to give me a little bit of wiggle room with my downpipe so that I can get it off of the turbo. And then there's the oil input lines, which there's a bolt. You'll take that bolt loose and it'll unsnap. And then there's the coolant lines on the side, which is held in by I believe an 8mm bolt. You take that loose and they'll unsnap off the side. And you have to be careful. You don't want to bend or twist those lines and move them around a whole bunch. You just, only what you need to achieve, removal and install of the turbo off of the car and onto the car. This is just a preliminary video kind of showing what we're going to get into. And as we go, I'll update with other segments of video showing you more and confirming bolt and nut sizes and such, etc. Okay, as you can see, I've got the intake pipe off. And what I did was I took the clamp off here that was on the intake side of the turbo down there. That's the inlet or intake side, depending on where you're from or how you were taught. And then I took this clamp loose from the stock air box to remove it, and removed the turbo bypass hose. And here's the two PCV lines that I have, because I have a catch can system and the way I have it set up. But one of them, you just move the blue tab over and pull it up and it'll release. And then my UPR catch can, it's got two spots that you squeeze on it right there. So the two gray sides, you squeeze both of those and pull up and it'll release. And that's the beginning steps to removing the intake pipe to get it off the turbo. Next, I've got to get the hot side pipe off, and I apologize for the lighting. I'm doing this after work, and I work night shift, so it's dark, and I'm using lighting so that I can kind of show y'all what I'm doing. I normally don't do anything at nighttime. I normally do it all during the daytime, but I'm excited and ready to get this thing installed, so I'm going ahead and doing some footage. Alright, this is my hot side charge pipe. This is the end that goes down to the hot side port on my intercooler. I just loosened the clamp off down there and pulled it right out of the boot. My turbo spark bypass valve or blow off valve. Mine is a recirculator valve because I don't need the sound of the psh. But anyways, it's the tube that runs to your intake, and when this opens, it vents back to the intake pipe. And then this is the clamp that I took off of the turbo inlet side, or I'm sorry, outlet side, where it sends the charged air out into the system. And all I did was take this clamp loose and slide it off. Make sure that you unplug your valve, your blow-off valve or your recirc valve, before you try to pull that pipe out, because you've damaged that plug or damaged the wiring or whatnot. You're going to be in bad shape. Okay, the next step is to remove the heat shield. And what I've done is I've removed the two 13mm nuts from the top of the heat shield, and down under here, which you can't really see, it's hard to try to capture on video, but it's right up under there on 2018, 19, and 20 Ecoboost Mustangs. It's this little 8mm nut. As you can see, I kind of boogered it trying to get on it, and that holds the lower portion of the heat shield on. You've got to remove it, and then what we're going to do, just grab that thing, pull it back, and kind of angle it back. You'll see I'm prying against that line there. You'll pull up and just keep working it and bending back, working it, bending back, pulling up. And it eventually will come out. Be patient. Pull up, bend back. Pull up, bend back. And just keep doing that until you get the heat shield out. The end product from removing the heat shield will look kind of like that. Don't worry about the little bends and stuff. If you decide to reinstall it, what you will do is you will push it back down in there and under, and it is very, very malleable stuff. You know, that being said, that don't mean grab a hold of it and just yank and go crazy with it. You don't want to rip it or destroy it. But alrighty, the next phase is we are going to remove the 3 vacuum lines that go to the turbo. You've got one here at the wastegate actuator, one down here that actually comes off the main clamshell of the turbo, and then one right here. Now, if you think you're going to have a problem with keeping track of what goes where, take a picture with your cell phone, draw a picture, you know, something. Mark it with tape. But make sure you remember what goes where, because it will go in the same spot on the NX2. Alright, I'm going to show you something that you may have caught in other videos, or you may not have caught, but it's going to be helpful. On this lower tube down here, you can kind of see it right here. It's a 90-degree angle tube. There's a nylon line coming out of it. Move the clamp down onto the elbow and remove the nylon line out of the hose down here. It's a lot easier than trying to reach down there and get that and work that off. Once we get the turbo off, that's when we'll take it off and put it on the new turbo and have it set up. That way, when we come back, all we got to do is ease this thing down, move this clamp back up, and it's clamped off. But as you can tell, I've got my lines loose. Next, we're going to take off the oil send line, the coolant lines, and whatnot from the turbo. This is the easy part. Now there's a return line down there underneath the turbo. That's the booger. It's easy to get off, hard to get back on. Advice has been to try not to move that line at all during this process. And I've also read some guys say, oh, you know, it's not that bad if you leave the turbo loose and wiggle it. We're going to figure it out as we go. But that's the return line, supply line, and the coolant in and out. Before I get ahead of myself, I had said in the previous step that I was going to go ahead and remove the coolant and the oil, the supply and return lines off the turbo. Before I do that, I'm going to take the 2 15mm nuts loose off the downpipe there and move this flange back. Now there's 2 13mm nuts down on a bracket down there that you can't see. If you take those loose, it will allow you to kind of get some wiggle room with your downpipe. That way, if you have any difficulties getting it to come off of the turbo outlet or exhaust port, that will give you some wiggle room to get it out of there. Once I get into that process, I will try to capture video to show you what I'm talking about. That will be coming momentarily. All right. As you can see, I've got the 2 15mm nuts backed off and the flange for my downpipe moved back. And there's 2 13mm nuts that I've loosened. I may opt to remove them to give myself more play than what I have. But I think once I take the remainder of the turbo loose and remove it from the side of the head, I think it may just come right on out. We'll see. If not, I'll push it back up on the studs and remove those nuts to give myself just a little bit more movement. I mean, you're not going to get a lot, but I mean, I guess every little bit helps. We'll see. As you can see, I've got the 2 15mm nuts backed off and the flange for my downpipe moved back. And there's 2 13mm nuts that I've loosened. I may opt to remove them to give myself more play than what I have. But I think once I take the remainder of the turbo loose and remove it from the side of the head, I think it may just come right on out. We'll see. If not, I'll push it back up on the studs and remove those nuts to give myself just a little bit more movement. I mean, you're not going to get a lot, but I mean, I guess every little bit helps. We'll see. Now, once you've got these 8mm bolts out, like on my oil input side, it pretty much just snaps down in there. There's going to be a little bit of oil that's going to leak out. You're just going to have to wiggle it. Be careful. It has an O-ring on it. You don't want to lose or damage that, even though the NX2 kit comes with new O-rings. You just want to wiggle that and pop it out of there. Same thing with the coolant lines. You might put your drip pan down up on the floor to try to catch any coolant that may or will leak out. You don't want to have a big mess on your hands. But you also have an 8mm bolt at the very bottom that if you'll reach through on the front side and back, you'll feel it. You'll take that out, and same thing, that line will unsnap out. It's got an O-ring on it. You just remove it out of there. You might stick a flathead screwdriver under the edge here. I wouldn't recommend it. I think I would probably just wiggle it, but if you just can't, you might try to get a little bit of leverage with a small flathead screwdriver there to pop it out. I don't advise it, but some of you may need to do that. Okay, just loosening up those 13mm nuts gave me enough wiggle room with my downpipe to be able to pull the OEM turbo out of its location. It was relatively simple, just took a little bit of finagling. As you can tell, I moved my oil return line. Didn't mean to, but I did. It's going to be a booger to put on from what I understand, but we'll see. Don't want any oil leaks or anything. Just kind of wiggled everything out from this angle over here and pulled it up through this section here, which, as you can see, there's my stock turbo there. Fixing to do a side-by-side comparison of it in the NX2, so you can kind of get an idea of what you're looking at. All right, what we have here is a side-by-side comparison of the stock 2.3 liter Ecoboost turbo and the Precision NX2. As you can tell, the manifold is the same-ish, but the main turbine housing is a massive difference. As you can see, I opted for the Turbo Smart wastegate actuator on both my turbos. Now, when I set up the Turbo Smart wastegate actuator on my NX2, I set it up at 5 to 6 millimeters, approximately 4 turns from, exact attachment. All right, this is all the O-rings and gaskets that came with my NX2 turbo kit. These are the various O-rings for the oil supply return and coolant supply and return. This one is my exhaust gasket, the new exhaust gasket, and this is the new turbo manifold gasket. I'll let y'all get these numbers. I know how aggravating it can be when you need the number and somebody goes zipping on. I'll clear that up for you. Alright, you will place the NX2 back in the way you took it out. It's a booger, especially if you got a catch can in your air conditioning line. It's kind of a booger to get down there, but you can do it. Take it slow. Be careful. Watch out for these lines. Don't let them get bound up. Don't let your oil supply line get bound up. And when you're putting your lines on, you want to wiggle and push them, and they'll kind of tink when they seat. The coolant lines have a top and a bottom, and one that has to go in before the other. Make sure when you remove them, you remember which one you took out first and which one came out second, because there's a plate on the bottom of each one of them, and it overlaps, and it has to go in there a certain way or it will not seal and it'll leak coolant. The real fun one's going to be that oil supply line you see down there in the shadows. That's going to be the real fun one. I've read and heard it is a real piece of work to get on there. So just take your time. Don't get in a rush. You'll get it there. Just take your time. Alright, and once you have your NX2 in position, you're going to put your 2 lower nuts on. And what we're going to do is we're going to torque those down with a 13mm socket to 37 foot-pounds so that the unit sits flush. Now, when you want to make sure you've got your manifold gasket and such in there, in between the downpipe and the exhaust exit port on the turbo. And then what we're going to do is we'll put that flange up, and we're going to torque those nuts with a 15mm socket to 20 foot-pounds, 20 to 25 foot-pounds, evenly back and forth until you've got that flange right here seated up against and pressing it on there. But that's after you have torqued those 2 lower nuts on. Alright, I've gotten my oil lines and such on, and I'm gonna tell you, that oil drain line, it's a hard one to get to. It'll get to you. I worked on it a good 30-45 minutes just to get that one little bolt in. You got to be precise. Do not cross thread that thing or you are screwed. It's gonna hurt your hands really bad trying to get in there. I ended up coming up from the bottom of the car to line mine up and getting it in. It hurts worse than an ex-girlfriend. Anyway, good luck with that. These 3 8mm bolts that hold those on, they're all torqued to 89 inch-pounds. The best way to do the water lines, bottom line first, top line second. They stack on. You make sure they're nice and snapped in. Run that 8mm bolt in. Same thing on top. Those two, they're a cakewalk compared to that bottom one. Go ahead and get ready. It's fun. Good luck. On to the next step. I got to finish connecting these lines, which I haven't done. Then I'm going to put my intake pipes back on, and I will be back to show you the final product. Okay, I got my intake pipes back installed. As you can see, I've got a 3.5 to 3.5 inch boot. Didn't really want blue, but that's what they had. I got some coming. I've still got to put the top 2 manifold nuts on and torque them to 37 foot-pounds. And I've got to hook up my PCV lines for my catch can and whatnot. And that pretty much wraps it up. I don't know if I'm going to put the heat shield back on or not. I'm thinking about it. But I may run it without it just for a little while, just to monitor things, so I have an open view of everything, make sure there's no leaks and whatnot, and come back and put the heat shield on later. But that should conclude it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.